hello to you. I'm Liz Thompson, National Education Manager of Janome Canada, and today I'm going to show you a whole lot of things about the 4 DLB Serger. That's one of our Janome Sergers, and you may have recently purchased this, or you may be looking to purchase a Serger. Either way, I'm hoping that these videos will be of great help to you. If you have purchased the Serger, you will know that there is an instructional DVD that comes with this Serger, and I have watched it from beginning to end, and I am happy to tell you that it is extremely good, and I'd like to encourage you to watch that because you're going to learn an awful lot about your Serger from that instructional DVD. There is also an instruction book that comes with this Serger, and that is also a great deal of help, and I will refer to that at times during this video. Now, I'm not going to repeat exactly what is on the DVD and in the manual, because those of course come with your Serger. But I do want to mention a couple of things. Is that you get a pair of tweezers that come with the Serger, and those are extremely useful. I love to use them to thread my needles and my loopers. There also are 2 screwdrivers. There's a little one and there is a bigger one. Let's just see if I can get it in the camera. All right, a bigger one, and both of those are also very useful for doing various things with your Serger. And also included with your Serger is a pack of needles. Let's get it into focus there. They're size 11 and 14 needles, and your local Janome dealer will be able to assist you with more needles should those eventually run out. I do want to mention one thing about needles is that it's always good to match your needles to the type of fabric you're using. So if you're using a knit fabric, it's probably a good idea to have a needle that is suitable for a knit fabric. And the other thing is, much the same as with a regular sewing machine, your needles will get blunt. And so I highly recommend that you kind of remember to change your needles on a frequent basis. If you leave your Serger needles in forever and ever, you're going to wonder why your Serger is making a bit of a loud noise, and your stitch quality may kind of fly out the window. And that's usually a good indication that your needles are pretty blunt and you need to put fresh new needles in. Okay. I have got the Serger set up here, and I've just put the antenna down a little because I want to point out to you that there are 2 thread guides for each of the 4 threads on the Serger. Right now, I only have the thread coming through this little one where it's so easy to thread. You just pop the thread in that little slit. But there are 2 holes. And I wanted to mention here that using that second hole is a good idea if you find that your thread is slipping out of the guide. That's usually only going to happen with a fancy decorative thread that's got a lot of bounce or spring in it. I'm using a regular white Serger thread here. In fact, those spools come on the machine when you take it out of the box, and I didn't even put any other Serger thread on. I just left them on because it's pretty good thread. So I just wanted to mention that, and what you would do then is you would thread it through this slit and then to the back, and then bring the thread back through that little hole to the front again, and then continue on with your threading. So right now I'm going to raise the antenna up, and I want to show you that we have, and I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see it. Let me look at the camera. Yeah. This comes with the Serger. It is a cone holder or a spool holder, and there are 4 of them, 1 on each of the pins at the back of the Serger. So I'm going to put that back on this one, and that's really handy because the spools, especially spools that have got large wide necks, they can wobble around a little. So if you have that spool holder on the Serger, it does help with that. Okay, there are a couple of other things I want to mention about thread and spools. And here we have a regular spool of thread. Now, perhaps you're making a garment and perhaps it's grey and you don't have any large cones of grey serger thread. Your local Janome dealer would be able to help you with that, but let's say you're in a hurry to finish a project and you do have some grey sewing machine thread and you may be lucky enough to have 4 spools of it, and then if you were to put that onto the machine, you're obviously going to have to take the spool holder off. You are going to want to put a spool cap on the top of that regular spool of thread, because of the speed of the serger, what will happen is that spool may jump up and down, bounce up and down, and it could even, if you're going fast enough, bounce right off this peg that holds the serger thread. So that spool cap doesn't actually come with this machine, but they are available at your local Janome dealer, and they come with many of our sewing machines. And I just thought I'd mention that as a little tip, an extra tip for you should you find the need of that. Then I wanted to also point out to you that you can buy large cones of serger thread in a very wide range of colors. Now, the brand of this one is Madeira Aerolock, and Janome Canada distributes that to our Janome and Elna dealers across Canada. It's a really, really good quality polyester serger thread. No bargain bin stuff. This is the real deal. And I wanted to give you another tip about this thread, is that not so much this thread, I haven't had any problems with this, but sometimes you have a thread that is giving you a little bit of problems. And another tip is to have a thread net that you can put over the serger thread. Basically what it does is it tames the thread, and I'm just going to pull the thread out from the top so that I can show you what I mean with this. All right, the thread is going to come out of the top of the thread net and go up to the antenna on your serger, and then down from there and thread it up in the machine. And all this thread net does, as I say, is it tames your thread and kind of keeps it under control, and that gives you a lot less problems than you might be experiencing. Personally, don't end up having to use a thread net very often. In fact, very, very seldom over the years, but I thought I'd throw that in as an extra little tip. Okay, another tip that I'd like to give you, as I already said to you, I left the white spools on the machine that came in the box with the machine. But here is a really, really good tip, especially if you are new to serging and you're not quite sure. Once you look at a piece of serging that's been done, if you're not sure what is my needle thread, my left needle, my right needle, my upper looper, my lower looper, it all sounds like mumbo jumbo to you. If that's the case, here is a really good tip. What I would suggest you do is thread up all 4 of your thread paths on the serger with a different color thread. This is marked yellow, blue, red or pink, and green. So my suggestion would be to thread up. So you can see on my little sample here, I don't know if you can see it really, but there is a yellow thread, which is the needle thread over there, and then you can't really see it, but no, I don't think you can. The blue thread, which is the right needle, the yellow is the left needle, it's there, and then my upper looper is green and my lower looper is red in this particular instance. So that will assist you, and why it will assist you is because if by any chance one of the threads was not flossed properly into one of the thread guides, or something's a little off, if you've got it threaded in different color threads, you can right away see which one is the culprit and which one needs to be fixed, so that you can then proceed with your serging without any further difficulties. So that is another tip for you. If you have them in different colors, then that will help you with your troubleshooting and your learning process. Obviously, once you come to start serging a garment, you wouldn't want multicolor threads unless that was a decorative finish that you were aiming for. You would then want all 4 spools to be the same color. Another tip that I want to give you is to think about flossing your teeth. And I'm going to take this thread here and pull it out of the tension disc. Always take your threads in both hands and then floss it into the machine, just like when you floss your teeth. And that means that you're going to have much less of a risk of missing a thread guide or not quite getting the thread into a thread guide properly. So always use 2 hands and use that flossing action. All right, I'm going to now open this little door on the front of the serger, and I'm going to point to a few of the features that we have here. Obviously, this machine and your DVD explained that quite well, and there was part of the DVD that you can actually ignore. That explained about the wraparound tension discs, where you have the round tension discs on the front. This is the lay-in tension discs, so you would follow the DVD where it explains that. So it comes down. This here is your upper looper, this is your lower looper, and there is a distinct order in which you need to thread your serger. If you don't thread it in this order, this is when you're going to run into difficulty. So you always start with your upper looper. That is the very first thread that you put onto your serger, thread into your serger. The second one is the lower looper, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the thread paths because it is explained extremely well in your manual and in the DVD. But you're going to thread that one first, and then you're going to follow the red or the pink guides, and there is the upper looper. And I'm just going to see if I somehow zoom in. That might be a little easier for you to see. That is the upper looper there, and there are the guides there. You can see the pink guide quite clearly. And then I'm going to zoom out a little, and you can see very clearly the green guides here. And as I say, the DVD and the manual explain quite well how to thread up all those paths. There is also a picture here showing the different colors so that you can see the threading path. I've opened the side door of the serger because there are a few things I want to show you here. First of all, this knob here is what lowers and raises the cutting knife. Now, it's quite hard to see it, but from the angle that I have the camera at, but that is the knife there. So if I push that knob in and then turn the knife down, I have now lowered the blade or the knife of the serger, and it won't cut fabric. The reason I've lowered it is because I want to show you this other knob here, which is what determines the cutting width of my fabric. So if you look over here, there is a little wall, or there it is there, you can see it a little better. And if I turn this knob, can you see that it is coming towards the right? And I can turn that to the right, or I can turn it back towards the left. And that determines how much fabric is cut off or not. And that is important, and we'll get to adjusting cutting width at a later point in the video, and I'll explain that. You also need the knife to be lowered and the this knob for the cutting width to be pressed in order to pull this pink knob backwards, which is moving the stitch finger on the machine. And that is the stitch finger over there. You can see it now. If I pull it backwards, it's gone. And we will, when we talk about rolled hems, we will do that little maneuver. But before I forget, I need to bring my cutting knife back up again and, of course, close my doors. All right, on this particular little sample here, it's a chiffon fabric, and I merely put black fabric behind it so that it would show up against the white paper. the blade cuts not enough fabric off. It cuts too little of the fabric off because it was too far over to the right. And what happens then is the fabric inside the stitching is too wide, and so it kind of curls and puckers a little. So that is when you would then adjust your cutting width, as I just showed you a moment ago. You would move that to the left or the right in order to cut a little more, just a little more fabric off. Now, if you look at this one over here, it's not that easy to see on this purple kind of, it's a Ponte fabric, Ponte knit. But if you look, you might be able to see that the stitches are kind of hanging off the edge of the seam. You might be able to see it a little better on this one. But if you ever find that your stitches are hanging off the edge of your seam, that is because you have cut too much fabric off. And therefore the stitches are kind of dangling over the edge of the fabric that you've cut. So on that, in that case, you need to move the cutting width a little bit to the right so that it will then cut less fabric off. This one at the bottom here, and it's better to have a look at it like this. There's a really good example. Can you see there? Let me just try and get it into focus for you at the right focal length. That the stitches are hanging off the edge of the fabric there. Whereas at the bottom here, they are just perfect. They are the upper looper and the lower looper thread, which I'll turn the sample over so you can see. That's the lower looper stitches at the back, and the little knots that loop the upper and the lower looper are forming exactly on the edge of the fabric. Nothing's curling in the seam and nothing's hanging over the edge. So that is what cutting width is all about, and what you might see a need to cut. And just to remind you, that is the knob that you are going to turn one way or the other to move that cutting width. And you do need, sorry, that's for the knife. This is for moving the cutting wall. Sorry, let me correct myself on that. Okay, we were. And I want to tell you a little bit about sergers and why they are so brilliant. If you've ever tried to sew knit fabrics with your sewing machine, you may have run into a few problems. Yes, there are overcasting or overlocking or stretch stitches on a regular sewing machine, but they simply do not give the same kind of stretch that a serge stitch can give. Can you see how I'm pulling this knit fabric, and that serging is just taking it with no difficulty at all. If I did that with a straight stitch or even a zigzag stitch or a stretch stitch on a sewing machine, it would not be so forgiving. So a serger really, in terms of sewing knit fabrics for garments or any other applications you may want to use the knit fabric for, quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, there is no other way of doing it. It is simply the best way of doing it. All right, I do want to show you a piece of, this is a knit fabric. It's a fairly soft knit fabric with cute little black monkeys on it. And I'm going to give you a real hint and tip here. When you are using very soft knit fabrics, they do have a tendency to pucker when you are seaming them. And a serger has a differential feed, which is this knob here. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on when I've repositioned the camera so you can see it better. We have a differential feed, which will change the speed at which the feed dogs work, and that can cut down on some of that puckering. But when I'm using a very flimsy thin knit, this is one of them. This happens to be another one. This is known as an ITY knit. It is very thin. It's a polyester one. I am not afraid of these knits. I use them all the time. I absolutely love them. My closet is full of knit garments. In fact, most garments, I'd say 95 to 99% of the garments that I make are all with knit fabric. And I'm not afraid of these soft fabrics because I discovered something called stay tape. And I have a roll of stay tape here. All it is, and this is stay tape for knit fabrics. It's got a bit of stretch in it. You can see as I pulled it there. And on the reverse side of it, you may not be able to see it in the camera, but if you feel it with your finger, it's a little bit rough because there are little beads of glue there. And so what I did, and by the way, it comes in different widths and different colors. This happens to be a sort of ivory color, and the one that I showed you on the monkey fabric is black. I like the one that is fusible because what I did prior to this taping was I fused that stay tape to one of the pieces of my fabric. I didn't do it to the other one because it isn't necessary. Sometimes if it's a really thin, flimsy fabric, just to be on the safe side, I might put stay tape on both of my pieces of fabric, and it gets fused or ironed to the wrong side of the fabric. You don't want to see that on the right side. And another tip, that's one tip, and when you now come and do your serged seam, which I'll do in a moment, you are going to find that it kind of stabilizes the fabric and you don't get that puckering with the very tricky fabrics. And so now that's opened up a whole new avenue for me, and I am never afraid of a knit fabric, no matter how thin it is. And this works for seams as well as hems, necklines, cuffs, all those sort of things. You can use your stay tape. All right, the next tip I want to show you is these clips. When you are serging, you want to be very, very careful with pins, because if you use a pin and you forget to take it out in time and you get to the blades on your serger and they cut into your pin, you run a very high risk of chipping or damaging your blade. And then you're going to have to buy a new blade because your blades are not going to cut properly and they're going to end up chomping your fabric, and that's really not very nice. So do look after your serger. Don't use pins if you can possibly avoid it. I prefer to use clips, and you'll see in a moment I can't sew over them or serge over them. I have to remove them before I get to the blade, and so for me they are the answer for serging. Okay, so I have the serger set up at the moment on a 4 thread, and I'm just going to take that little clip out. You do not need to raise the presser foot when you are doing serging. Do you see how I just lifted the foot and popped the fabric underneath it? And now I am going to come along here and serge along. Now do you see I can't sew over that clip, so then I just remove it when I get to it and continue serging down my seam, and then take the next one out, and then I get to the end and I have a little blade on the side of the machine where I can cut it off. And so there we have our serging, and there's the back of the seam as well, and there's no waving on that seam. Do you see that? It's beautifully flat because of the stay tape. I wanted to talk a little bit about chaining off, because you saw what I did with this little seam that I just did is I chained off on the end. I don't stop serging right at the end. I continue serging so that there's a little chain. So what do we do with those chains of serger thread? One of the things you can do is, if that was the first seam you were doing and you're now going to be sewing you're going to be sewing another seam, don't worry too much about it, because that tail will just get taken into the next seam and it will be secured. But if you want to get rid of those tails and you want to neaten up your garment or whatever it is you're making, you might not want to cut the tail off right at the edge because it can unravel. So what I've done here is I have threaded up, these are tapestry needles. Why I chose a tapestry needle is because it has a blunt tip. You don't want the tip to be sharp and catching on your serging. So what I've done here is I took the serger tail and threaded it into the eye of the needle. And now I have taken my tapestry needle and I have fed it into my seam between the two layers of fabric. And that way I'll never see it. It'll be completely hidden. And then what I do is I simply push that tail further down into my seam. And when I think I've gone far enough, I pull my tail has been threaded through, and there it is. It's come out at this point on my seam, and all I do there is I now come with my scissors and I cut off that tail. But my thread tail is now nicely tucked away inside my seam, and it's not going to unravel. Another method, if you're really wanting to be quick and easy, is to use a product called Fray Check or Fray Stop. And then what you would do is you would put a little bit of Fray Check or Fray Stop on the threads at the end of the seam where you cut those threads. Personally, I prefer to thread my tails into the seam. I think it's safer, and it really doesn't take that long to do. All right, the next thing that I want to show you is how to remove the presser foot. So you won't be able to see it at the angle that the camera is at the moment, but behind the foot is a little button or a lever, and you just press that and the foot pops right off. And to put the foot back on again, all you do is position it underneath and press the presser foot down again, and the foot is back on the ankle of the foot. And that is covered in page 18 of the manual. By the way, the chaining off and how to end off your seams, like I showed you with the tapestry needle a moment ago, you'll find that on page 50 of the manual. Now I'm going to move the camera a little this way because I want to show you these two knobs on the side, on the right hand side of the machine. This one at the top here, and let me get my little pointy stick to show you. This is this one at the top. You'll notice it's got a bunch of numbers on it. The highest number is 4 and the lowest number is 2 and R and 1. Now what that is your stitch length dial or knob. So if generally speaking, when you're doing serging, you're going to have it somewhere around 2, and you can't see it too well, but the little mark to line up the number is about there on the machine. You can see it on the side of the machine. I just don't want to move the camera too much because it tends to make people seasick. All right, if you're doing a rolled hem, which we will cover in the next part of the, in part 2 of the video, is R, and you turn it to R, which means it's got a fairly small stitch length, which is what you want with rolled hems. Sometimes I even go down to 1, which means my stitches are even closer together. So that's the stitch length dial. The one below it, this one here, this is the differential feed that I made mention of earlier. And the differential feed has markings from 0.5 all the way to 1, 1.5, and 2 and 2.5. What does the differential feed do? Well, I think I mentioned earlier that what it does is it speeds up or slows down the action of the feed dogs. So if, for example, you had a fabric like I showed you earlier, that's a very soft, stretchy knit, and you didn't have some stay tape perhaps, and you wanted to feed this fabric through the machine, and it started waving and rippling, and your seam looked awful. What you can do is you can speed up the action of the differential feed or the feed dogs to 1.5 or 2. And what it'll do is it will feed that knit fabric through the serger, under the foot and through the serger, quicker than normal, which means the fabric doesn't stretch as much and therefore doesn't ripple and wave. Okay, but if you want to do something entirely different, and I'm just looking for my sample on the table, maybe you want the edge to ripple and wave. And this is where you have something that looks like this, and it's known as the lettuce leaf edge. And this was done with a rolled hem. And what I did in that instance was I turned the differential feed all the way down to 0.5. And what that did was it slowed down the action of the feed dogs so that when the fabric went through the serger, it stretched the fabric out. And then when it let go after going through the serger, it twirly-whirlied up like a lettuce leaf edge. And so that is what a differential feed is going to do for you. And the normal setting, which is what you'll use for most of your projects, is going to be 1. Okay. What I want to show you is you're going to use the small screwdriver that comes with the machine for this, and you are going to come here and you are going to see 2 little black screws over there. The top one, and I don't know if you can read it from the camera, but it's got a little L there. That top screw is for the left needle. And the right screw, the lower screw rather, has got an R next to it, and that is for the right needle. So if you want to take a needle out, which we will do just now, so I'm not going to do it right now, I just wanted to point out where it's done. And you might need to remove a needle because you're doing 3-thread serging and not 4-thread with the 2 needles. This is the screwdriver and the little screws that you are going to use for that. And here's a tip that once you have loosened the screw and taken the needle out, you are going to want to make sure that you tighten that screw a little because while you're serging, it may fall out. So that's just a little tip. It's never really happened to me, but you know what? It's worthwhile to be better safe than sorry. As I said to you, you have got a pack of spare needles from your in your machine. This knob here, that is the presser foot pressure adjustment knob. And your manual will explain to you turning it clockwise and turning it anti-clockwise. That's explained in your manual. And what it does, and you won't be able to see that on the camera now, but it will determine the pressure that the presser foot is pressing down on the fabric. So for some projects you might want to release the pressure a little. Some projects you may want to increase the pressure. For example, if you are doing something like a chiffony soft fabric and it's slipping and sliding all over the place, you might want to increase the pressure of the presser foot on the fabric a little. Whereas if you're making something that's with a thicker fabric like a coat or a jacket, you might want to loosen up on that pressure a little because the fabric might not be feeding as smoothly under the foot because it's pressing down too hard on the fabric. Okay, just a little more about this knob on the top of the right side of the machine, the stitch length knob. I wanted to show you something that I actually stitched out to give you an idea of what the stitch length does to your serging. This is a 4-thread serging, and over here the stitch length is kind of fairly close together. That was probably at about 1.5 or 2. This is about 2.5, and then this is fairly wide. It's been taken all the way up to 3.5 or 4. So that's just giving you an idea of what happens when you change your stitch length on a serger. The next thing I want to also talk about is oiling. And if you go to page 78 on your manual, it explains there's little arrows that point to exactly where you're supposed to oil, and that is usually done inside the machine. For example, that is one place where you put oil, and there's another place down there. But like I say, page 78 in your manual is going to explain where to oil. And I always like to use the analogy that you wouldn't drive your car for 10 years without ever putting oil in it. And so it is with your serger. If your serger is starting to sound noisy and rattly, check your needle. Is it new? And check that when did you last oil and clean your serger, because those usually are the culprits when your serger is kind of getting into a little bit of difficulty because you haven't been looking after it. Okay, so oiling is very important. Also on page 74 of your manual, it will explain to you about cleaning. Now, this was a brand new serger that I opened just the other day out of a brand new box, and you can see already that the little tiny bit of serging that I've been doing, showing you a few things and testing out some stitches prior to this taping, look how much lint and fluff has collected in there already. So get yourself a good lint brush and make sure that you clean out this whole area. Open this door, clean out. Don't use canned air that blows the dirt further or the lint further into your serger. It's much better to use one of those little vacuum cleaners. I bought a little mini vacuum cleaner, battery operated one, that really is perfect for taking the lint and fluff out of my sewing machines and sergers. It really works very well. But a good brush also does the trick. There is also on page 84 of your manual, there is a list of accessories that are optional accessories that you can purchase for your serger. And I'm just going to tell you now some of the things that are available. There's a blind stitch foot, so if you want to do invisible or blind hems with your serger, that is available to you. There's a taping foot, cording feet, there's a beading foot, a gathering attachment, elasticators. There's a whole lot of things on page 84 that you can look at, and you would then contact your local Janome dealer and they would be able to help you further with those. We have done a number of posts on sergers and serger accessories on our Janome Life blog, and in the description to this video we will put some links so that you can go to Janome Life and have a look. We've been doing Janome Life for more than 10 years, and there is an awful lot of information that you can find in the archives there, and you don't have to go sifting through 10 years of blog posts. All you need to do is put whatever you're looking for in the little search box and it will come up with that. We will also we have been doing Instagram lives since the end of March, and those are all saved. After the Instagram live, we saved the video and we've been putting that onto the same channel where you are watching this video right now. That is on our Janome Life YouTube channel. And I will make sure that we do some videos on some of these accessories so that you can see what they do and how they're used. The other good thing about Janome Life and Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page and we have our YouTube page, is that if you've got your new 4 DLB Serger home and you hit a little bit of a roadblock, or you have a speed wobble and you're not quite sure what your next step should be, all of those forums, you may send a query to us and we will help you. As far as we can, we'll help you in terms of kind of an email. But as I say, that is where you can contact us and we will give you assistance.